One of my favorite things in the world to do is watch Friends. I know it's been off for years and years. It's not even around, but I still find myself binge watching old episodes. And I was thinking about this today and thinking, it's the predictability of the friends in the circle, right? You have Chandler with his quirkiness, Monica with her type A of just everything has to be so neat and tidy and organized. It's Phoebe's ability to make you laugh at her silly songs. Ross always comes in with those smart comments, and Joey and him and his food, like it is just so hilarious. And of course, Rachel, she just brings everybody together, and it's just such this beautiful, cohesive team of people. And it's why I wanted to come on and share with you today that I have an opportunity for you to find your friends in the content creation space. So if you are thinking about creating your first or your next digital course, I don't want you to miss this opportunity because Amy Porterfield just opened the doors for registration for her Course Confident Bootcamp. And I'm actually offering a special bonus for anyone that registers for the Course Confident Bootcamp through my special link. So I want you to go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register. That's crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And what you're going to find when you get there is I have this special bonus private podcast series. It's called Money Mindset for Creators. So I want you to go register for Amy's bootcamp, download the podcast, and immediately start listening to it, because what this training is set up to do is to help you get your mind right about monetizing your content, making money so that you can fuel your content creation dreams. So go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register for Course Confident. And I cannot wait for you to find your friends and find the people that will be there for you. Do you see what I did there? Yeah, nice little friends segue connection. Go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And I cannot wait to see you inside. Okay, let's get into today's episode. So this is going to sound like a really funny thing to say, especially for someone who appears as extroverted as I am. I don't have a ton of friends. And when I say that, I mean, I don't have a ton of really good, close friends. And there's a few reasons for this. First of all, if you don't already kind of know my story, between my husband and I, we have moved so much. There was a period in, it was between 2012 and 2017, like we moved 4 times in 5 years. Right. This is crazy. It's crazy. So we've done a lot of moving. It was really hard to get settled in different places. And I just have a few very select group of friends that I just hold near and dear to my heart. And I tell you this because whenever I make new friends, and I've made so many new friends in the podcast space, I have a short list of people that I really geek out with behind the scenes. Like really, really, like we go deep into some of the most obnoxious questions that we get asked as online business owners or people that are podcasters, or we do YouTube stuff. Like we just kind of go back and forth behind the scenes, and we love to geek out. It's one of my favorite things because I know I don't have to do a lot of explaining, right? I don't have to do a lot of, oh, well, you have this and here's an email sequence and I have to explain what that is. And then, oh, it's ConvertKit, but let me tell you about this, like what ConvertKit is. And then you have to include Zapier or Zapier, or however you want to say it. And then like I can have conversations where I don't have to keep explaining myself as I would with someone who's not in the online business space. So the reason I bring all of this up here with you today is because I'm going to pretend that you and I are besties. Like we are sitting down, we're at my local coffee shop, and we are chatting about what it's like to have a private podcast. And I know you're like, whoa, that's like, where did that come from? What is she even talking about today? Well, that's really where this whole conversation stemmed from. Is I was having one of these back-to-back Voxers with a friend that's in the podcasting space, and we were talking about private podcast, what we think about them, what the future is of private podcast, and that's a little bit about what I'm going to share with you here today. So let's get right to it. Welcome to the Profit Podcast, where we teach entrepreneurs how to start, launch, and market their podcast. I'm your host, Crystal Profit, and I'm so excited that you're here. Thanks for hanging out with me today, because if you've been trying to figure out the world of podcasting, think of this show as the time-saving shortcut you've been looking for. So let's get right to it, shall we? So why have a private podcast for your next launch? Whatever it is, right? There's so many different scenarios where you could bring up the term launch. So I want to be very clear about what I'm talking about. So if you have been around my business and my podcast, my YouTube channel, my email list, like any of those things, social media, you've probably seen me launch things a lot this year. I'm like, I can see my 12-month calendar on the wall, and I can see all the different launches that we've had. I've done a launch for my own course. I've done launches for other people's courses. I've done affiliate launches. I've done a lot of different, what I would call launches or promotions throughout the year. And each time I tweak it based on the length of the launch, how much the program is going to cost, and how much, there's just a lot of different factors that go into play whenever I'm deciding how much or how little is going to go into this launch. For example, here's a prime example. Digital Course Academy, right? I'm an affiliate. I'm a proud partner with them. And I put a lot of time and effort into that launch. Like, the cart didn't open for people to actually start buying that until September. I planned that. I started planning it in June. Yeah, there was a lot of planning that goes into that. And actually, I was able to reuse some of my plans from the year before, because it was my second year to be an affiliate. And so there's a lot that goes into launches. And so that's why I want to bring up private podcasts, because I know that whenever I'm recording this, right, like if you're listening to this in real time, it's November 2021. And it is likely that there are people listening to this right now that are launching things in January or February of 2022. And so what I want you to start thinking about is a private podcast something that you should consider adding to your launch plan? Now, I have to be really honest. I don't like teaching things that I've never done before, because I had never had a private podcast for myself. Like, I had never created one. I knew how everything worked in theory, but I didn't really know all the logistics behind it and what all to expect. But I had participated in a private podcast. And I know I've talked about this before, but Emily Hirsch, who is a Facebook ads expert, she had a pop-up private podcast in March of 2021. And you're like, Crystal, that's really specific. How do you, why do you remember all these things? Well, it's because her private podcast sold me on her low-cost monthly membership that I joined for a while. And the reason why I remember when I listened to this podcast is because it happened over my kids' spring break. And so every year for spring break, we usually go visit family, or maybe we kind of make our way around Texas. We have family that lives in Austin and West Texas and North Texas and East Texas. So sometimes we'll make our way around the state. And I just remember I was driving in the car. I have my noise canceling headphones on. And I remember thinking, I'm going to finally have time to listen to this podcast that Emily was putting out for this short period of time. And I knew I wanted to listen to it. I didn't even know what it was about. I just knew it's a private podcast. What does that even mean? What do you mean it's does it just go away? Is she going to delete it? What is happening? And so the whole experience, as a podcast coach, I was like, I want to just kind of dive into what this is, what this could mean, and how it all works, because it was just so mysterious to me. And what it was is Emily had a 3-part series. It could have been 4 parts, maybe one where she like explained what was going on in one episode and then like 2 or 3 follow-up. But it was really cool because it felt so now. And what I mean by that is most of the time, like even you, if you're listening to this like way far out in the future, you could be interested in this piece of content, but this is likely going to be evergreen. Even if the tools and how to do this, like I'm going to mention here in a second, like even if those tools go away or maybe the steps change to create a private podcast, the concept of a private podcast will likely evolve. Maybe it'll be different in, 12 months, 24 months from now, but the principle of why you would have one would stay the same. Therefore, today in this episode, I'm creating an evergreen piece of content. Okay? So it's something you can listen to 12 months from now, 24 months from now, and it's going to be the same concept.
Being a woman in business comes with its own unique set of challenges, but also so many opportunities. We get ahead by leaning in to what makes us different from business as usual. I'm Samantha Hartley, host of Profitable Joyful Consulting, inviting you to a special 6-episode series exploring the experience of being a woman in business. You want to hear from women consultants who've hit $1 million, who sell 6-figure engagements, or who've broken their own revenue ceilings? Yeah, those are my clients, and they'll be sharing too. Join me for 6 must-listen episodes that tackle key challenges for women consultants.
Follow Profitable Joyful Consulting on your favorite podcast app.
But with a private podcast, and this is what I think is so cool, is there were things that were addressed in those episodes where it felt like she was sending me like voice memos. Like that's how it felt. And I know like they weren't like short little messages back and forth, but it was like, okay, make sure you do this by this date. Like it was very finite. And if you are in marketing or you know anything about selling a product, a service, a course, a program, whatever, urgency matters. Having people know that this thing will only be here for a certain amount of time is really important if you're trying to get people to do something. You're trying to get them off the fence, right? They're like, oh, I don't know if I want to sign up for the thing. I don't know if I want to try this. I was so excited, so fired up to be a part of, and I was just a listener, y'all. I was just a consumer of what she was doing. But basically what she had done was she had shifted the model from I'm going to do a regular like live stream masterclass. And so what she did, or what we would call a webinar, right? A lot of people know that as a webinar. It's a free masterclass. What she did is she took relatively the same type of content that she could teach in a live training or even a pre-recorded training, and she turned it into a private podcast. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so smart. Why hasn't this been a thing for a while? And I think it's because the technology is just now catching up. Because if you've launched a podcast, you're nodding along and you're just like, yeah, that seems like a lot of work, Crystal, for just a short amount of time. Or to just have like, you're going to put all these pieces of a podcast together just to put it up for a week or 2 weeks, and then you're going to take it all down. That just sounds like a pain in the butt, right? Like, and I get it. I totally understand. And maybe that's why this hasn't previously been a strategy that you would normally use, because I mean, there's a lot of variables of it seeming like a lot of work and not worth the payoff. But there are some really cool tools, and we're going to talk about that here in a second, that you can use to create this and make it a lot easier. So I wanted to tell you that, like, before we go any further, there are some tools that make this possible. They make it possible too for you to even have an evergreen podcast that like gives someone access to the podcast for like 7 days and then it takes it down. There's a lot of automation involved in that, and that's a lot more technical. But what we're talking about today is really the why. Why would you have a private podcast? So I wanted to break that down a little bit. So we kind of talked about it could be in an addition to or in replace of a masterclass. So what you could do is you could create a 2 or 3 episode series and then invite them to your masterclass, right? That's how you would do this as like in addition to for your next launch. You could say, hey, we're doing this private podcast. I want you to go check it out. And then in the last episode, you tell people, hey, and if you're listening to this before this date, make sure you go register for my free masterclass you would give them the URL, you would do the whole call to action. But I think it's a cool way to incorporate a private podcast into your next launch. But like I said, you could do what Emily did and you could have the entire masterclass replaced with this podcast that people could go back and listen to over and over again. Because if you're already a podcaster and you're seeing success with your show, it's likely that your audience would react really well to having a private podcast. So it's something to consider. There's a few other things that I wanted to share behind the scenes of like why you would do this. I love the idea of using it to give away exclusive things. Now, what I mean by this is, and I don't know, I didn't follow Emily's launch like to the T. By the way, I have some case studies coming in the future because y'all have been asking me. I want to know about these case studies because the Office Ladies case study episode that I did is the most downloaded episode. So I know that y'all want more of these things. You want me like going into detail about why something was successful versus not successful. And I really want to dive into this, but I'm going to use Emily's example. This is my case study for a private podcast because it worked. Like I told y'all, like I actually went and bought her thing. I went and enrolled in her membership because of this private podcast. It worked on me. But one of the other things that she did, she was selling, she was pitching her low membership or low cost membership, which is what I joined. But she also was saying, and if you want exclusive access to this discount on our services, you can use this promo code or you can do this step, right? I don't remember exactly what the call to action was, but it was like you can get $100 or it might have even been several hundreds of dollars because they're an agency that they charge a lot of money for their Facebook ads. It's like a whole thing. Like you have a tiered system whenever you get into doing advertising and how much ad spend you want to do every month and all those things. And she was like, and if you enroll by this date or get on a discovery call with us, you can get this amount off your monthly services, which I thought was so smart because not everybody wants to advertise a discount, right? So here's another great example. If you have a course or a program and it's higher ticket and you're like, I don't want to put on the website that people could get, 20% off or 50% off or $100 off, like whatever that would look like. But you do want to reward maybe your loyal fans, your loyal listeners, and you're like, you know what, I'm just going to test this out and see if it works. You could do that in your private podcast because those are going to be the people that are dedicated to what you're doing and they would love a discount. So it's another way to kind of test out a few things that you don't want necessarily blasted all over your social media, all over your sales page, or all over somewhere else. You could kind of slip it into your podcast and see if those calls to action work. And then you can learn from it, like do a debrief after your launch and say, did that work? Did that not work? Should we do it again? Should we not do it again? I'm always a fan of learning after every single launch. It's the only way to get better and the only way to really streamline things in the future. So we talked about the masterclass, using it for promo. Behind the scenes, y'all, behind the scenes, I don't know what it is about it. And maybe it's just me and the type of people that I attract, but I love seeing a good behind the scenes. I really do. I love knowing the inner workings of how business is run or a podcast or content management. Like I'm such a nerd on all those things. And I think that if you were to create a private podcast that's really meaty and juicy for your audience, you could use it as a lead magnet for your next launch, right? I've actually thought about doing this. And I don't have plans to do it. It's just been a thought of mine. But I have one particular PDF that I've used in my past 2 DCA affiliate launches, and it's a launch debrief where I break down all of my launches, how much money I made, how much I spent on my ads, how much my emails that I sent out and all these other things. And I thought, well, like an income report. Have you ever seen those? Like where they do a blogging income report or vlogging, or people just say, hey, this is how much money I've made. I've thought about that would be a really cool next step, like kind of podcast. Like if I wanted to do that in the future as a private podcast to get people interested in getting results with the program that I'm offering. So I'm launching a new program in 2022. And I thought, you know what, that would be kind of cool if I said, hey, in my podcasting journey, here's how much money I made, here's where it came from, and like just really sharing things that I don't often share publicly, and I wouldn't have to commit to like it being out there in like a podcast episode or a YouTube video. I can always take it down because it's part of the private podcast. So that's another thing to consider is if you were going to do a private podcast for your next launch, is there some sort of behind the scenes that you could share that won't live out there on Evergreen forever? It would just be something you put out for a short amount of time and then you can take it down. So that's another thing. And then the last one that I just really love for you to consider for a private podcast is student testimonials and student wins. I mean, what you could do that would be pretty cool is, how people will have a sales page that has testimonials and they're either written or they're videos. What if you took those and put them into a few podcast episodes? They don't have to be long. They could be short. It could be less than 5 minutes where you're putting in clips from your students that are saying, oh, if you're thinking about joining this program, then here's my number one takeaway, or these are the types of results that I got, or this is what I do, and here's how this program helped me. There's so many different ways that you could really incorporate your students' wins and successes into a private podcast so that whenever people, like you open the cart to start selling your thing, people are excited because they've already heard the other types of success that people have gotten. And I feel like I could just go on and on and on about all the different marketing ways that you could use a private podcast, but this is actually something I'm teaching in a workshop that's coming up. Yes, like if you've heard some of the different things that we've been promoting, if you're listening to this in real time, we're doing a workshop all about a private podcast, and it's happening on Wednesday, November 10th, 2021. So if you're listening to this in the future and it's already passed, I'm sorry. I don't even know if we're going to have a replay for this workshop, but I'm really excited about it because I'm teaching private podcast, and I don't like to do things I don't like to teach things that I've never done before. And so I created my first private podcast. So if you're listening to this in real time, you can go to crystalprofit.com/episode 304. That's the show notes for this episode. And you're going to find a link to the private podcast. I really want you to go check it out. I would love your feedback. I would love for you to tell me if it was super helpful, if you liked the format, but I kept everything very simple because, like I said, I don't like to do things, or I don't like to teach things that I'm not doing myself. And so even though I learned all these other things from Emily and the experience that I've had working with tools like Hello Audio and Kajabi, then I can tell you I've learned a lot, but until you do it, you don't really know. And so in this workshop, I'm teaching how to create a private podcast, why you would need it. We're going to go even deeper into how to create a funnel with a private podcast and what that can look like. I'm also teaching another workshop on that same day, all about turning a product into a podcast. And you can sign up for both workshops or just one or the other. And I'm really excited for you to learn more about these workshops because they are going to be amazing. I've never done this before. People have been asking me like, okay, you have your course, you have your book, but what about your next thing? Like, what's going on? And I know I'm working on like the big program that we're going to have in 2022. But for now, I wanted to give y'all something that would give you some quick wins as you prepare for the next year. I want you to start thinking about, how can I use a private podcast in 2022? What could that look like for me? And I also want you thinking about, if you already have products, how can you incorporate those products into creating a podcast? Or how can you help complement your product and your podcast together so that each one has a bigger impact? I'm so excited about these workshops. Again, you can go to crystalprofit.com/episode 304 to learn more about how to get registered for the free podcast. I'm really excited about this limited series podcast, and how to register for the workshops that are happening on Wednesday, November 10th, 2021. But that's all I have for you today. I hope that you learned a little bit about private podcast, why you would need one for your next launch, and a few ideas that are hopefully swirling around in your head. Hopefully your head's not exploding like mine typically does whenever I start thinking about launches and I'm like, ooh, that sounds like a really cool idea. That's where all of this stemmed from, y'all. Like whenever I find something really cool that somebody else is doing well, I love to get in there, do the research, see how it's working, ask myself, how can this work for me? And that's really where all this information stemmed from today. But that's all I have for you. So again, show notes, crystalprofit.com/episode 304. Make sure you go grab the limited series podcast while it's available and sign up for the workshops. They're only $47 a piece. And if you wanted to get a discount, you could register for both and get 20% off. So make sure you go get registered, and I cannot wait to see you there. But as always, remember, keep it up. We all have to start somewhere. Hey, Profit Podcast listeners. Thanks for sticking around to a little bit after the episode to hear this special message, because I want to hear from you. We are starting a new segment called Fan Mail Shoutouts, and I want to hear from you, and I want to hear your questions. What do you want to know? What questions have you been dying to ask me? So here's how to make this happen. Go to the app where you're listening to this podcast right now. Go there. I'll wait a second. Okay. Now, once you're there, you're going to see a hyperlink at the top of the episode description that says, send Crystal a text message. And that's all I want you to do. Send me a text. It could be casual, informal. It could be totally anonymous. Or if you want, you can include your name and the name of your podcast or content wherever you are creating, and I will give you a special shout out in an upcoming episode. So again, go to the show notes for where you're listening to this episode right now, and it will say, send Crystal a text message. And I cannot wait to hear from you and give you a shout out in an upcoming segment of Fan Mail Shoutouts.